Well, welcome back everybody to the Professional Development Webinar Series brought to you by Ave Maria Press. Our goal in this series, as always, is to provide parish staff and volunteers, and as well as diocesan ministers, the formation, the training, and the tools that they need to create vibrant Catholic parishes and growing ministries. In today's webinar, Jim Merhaut, will share insights into ministry with midlife adults in their 40s and 50s. My name is Jared Dees. I'm the Content Marketing Manager at Ave Maria Press, and I'm joined by Christina Pignon. She's the Parish Marketing Coordinator.
Before we begin our webinar, we would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils.
So everyone in the audience is muted, but you can ask questions, and questions may be sent to our presenter using the GoToWebinar panel, using the question section of the GoToWebinar panel you can see displayed here. Christina and I will read as many of those questions as we can towards the end of the presentation. Also like to note that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a link to you later this week with a recording of the webinar in your email.
And with that, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter, Jim Merhaut, is the founder and director of Coaching to Connect, a coaching, training, and consulting service offered to individuals, churches, businesses, and couples. He is also a writer, retreat leader, and national speaker. He holds a Master of Science degree in religious education from Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, and is an author and co-author of 9 books and dozens of other publications. Jim's most recent contribution was to the Lifelong Faith book, Seasons of Adult Faith Formation. Jim and his wife, Debbie, have 5 children and reside in Youngstown, Ohio, where they enjoy organic gardening, walks in the park, and pursuing a simple lifestyle. Learn more about Jim at www.coachingtoconnect.com.
All right, here we go, Jim.
Okay, how are we looking there?
Should be good to go.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm really glad to be with you today. This is our webinar on middle adult faith, and I'd like to give you just a little overview of what we're going to be covering in today's webinar before we begin. So really 4 main areas. I'm going to begin by contextualizing middle adult faith in a relatively new theory of adulthood. And so I'm going to spend a good bit of time just sort of walking through that and giving you a sense of that, since it is new to most of us. And then we'll talk about some key generational characteristics of middle adulthood, and then some key developmental characteristics of middle adulthood. And then I have a list of about 10 very practical applications of, for churches, for parishes to enhance their approach to middle adults in the context of ministry. And of course, we have some Q&A at the end, so go ahead and fire your questions in there in the chat box at any point during the webinar. So let's begin. You're familiar with this quote from Genesis, and this is a great place to start when we are thinking about this new theory on adulthood. And I'm going to begin with a story. There was a bishop in 1760, and this is a true story. This bishop was a Spanish bishop, and he worked in an orphanage. And he noticed, and actually noted in his diary, that children in the orphanage were dying. And he believed that they were dying of loneliness because he could come up with no other explanation for their death. So that was 1760. And in the 200 years that followed that notation in that diary, many other people noticed the same thing happening in institutions, particularly in hospitals or orphanages, that there were certain children who simply would socially withdraw and stop taking food and water, and they would just die. It wasn't until the 1950s, with the work of John Bowlby, psychologist John Bowlby, it wasn't until the 1950s when we really started to understand what was going on, and we could develop a a comprehensive theory for what was happening to children who died of loneliness. And Bowlby called it his theory of child attachment. And in this theory of child attachment, he noted that children thrive in every way when they experience positive emotional attachment. And here we see a quote from John Bowlby on his attachment theory. The infant and the young child should experience a warm, intimate, continuous relationship with his mother or permanent mother substitute in which both find satisfaction and enjoyment. So warm, intimate, and continuous relationship. So it's something that needs to be ongoing, not just one or two good experiences with another person, but deep warmth, deep intimacy, and a lot of repetition to those experiences of warmth and intimacy. And then also note that he says that both the child and the mother need to find that experience of warmth and intimacy satisfactory. Not just the child, but the mother too needs to have satisfaction and enjoyment in that experience. And then he said this: if a community values its children, it must cherish their parents. It's in the 1950s. And how long have we at churches been wondering about that idea, about how important parents are in the nurturing of children? So if churches want success with children and teens, then they really do need to shift their emphasis to parents and other adults. And so this focus that we have on adult faith formation, and today we're focusing particularly on middle adults, is critically important. So we've known this for over half a century, right? But we're still trying to get it. Bowlby did theorize that his theory of child attachment could also be applied to adults, but he died before he was able to prove that. And his work pretty much wrapped up before the 1980s rolled around. But then in the 1980s, two researchers at the University of Denver, Phil Shaver and Cindy Hazen, took up Bowlby's theory and began to apply it to adults. And what they discovered was that the emotional attachment needs that children have never go away. We never outgrow the need to have warmth and intimacy in a continuous way in our human relationships. And so for a person to be a healthy adult, this kind of shattered all of our images of what a healthy adult looked like. We used to think that a healthy adult was somebody who was independent, self-sustaining, could stand on their own 2 feet. But since the 1980s, Shaver and Hazen's work, which was replicated in study after study and continues to be studied, tells us that no, the healthy adult is the attached adult, not the independent adult. Dr. Sue Johnson is a marriage therapist in Canada, and I love this quote from her: "Emotional connection among human beings is like oxygen." And it captures so nicely how critically important it is to have that connection. And of course, in Bowlby's work, he was the one that taught us that, yeah, children don't just need food and water and clean air to breathe. They need human connection. They need warm attachments. And now we know that adults need that as well. So here's a list of characteristics of what a healthy attached adult looks like. Healthy attached adults prioritize relationships. So relationships are critically important in healthy adulthood. Healthy adults understand and appropriately express emotions verbally and non-verbally. So what that means is that healthy adults are people who have a high level of emotional intelligence. They can read their own emotions, and they can read the emotions of people that they're interacting with, whether it's a one-on-one interaction or it's a group interaction. And they can respond to those emotions appropriately. Healthy adults value intimacy. They don't just look for surface relationships. They always want to take their relationships to a deeper level. And they use warmth and healthy conversational styles to get to that level of intimacy. Healthy adults are really great at expressing gratitude. And it's not just gratitude in a surface kind of way where you just say thanks for that, but healthy adults know how to express gratitude with detail. So it's, yeah, thank you for that, and here's why I'm grateful. When you did this, it made a difference in my life in this way. Or I'm grateful for what you did in the organization because here's the difference that it's making for us. It's gratitude with specificity. Healthy adults offer and receive forgiveness. They don't get tangled up in long, bitter battles. Healthy adults are playful. They never lose that childlike way of being joyful and having fun. Healthy adults deliberately manage their stress. So they learn how to capture the signals of stress in their own body. They know how their body responds when it's under stress. They know the muscle groups that tense up, and they develop a plan to manage that so that it doesn't get the best of them in their relationships. And then healthy adults also feel very safe in exploring and learning. And this is one of the key insights that John Bowlby had, is that when you have a healthy attachment, a healthy human attachment, it gives you sort of a safe base from which you can move out into the world and explore and learn. So we see that in children in terms of their ability to have play dates and to successfully go off to school. And in adults, we see that in overcoming the fear of learning new things and trying new things and experimenting with new things and doing pilot projects and really getting out there and learning. So that's a mark of a healthy attached adult. One of the marks of an unhealthy adult is being locked in fear, and we spin our wheels doing the same things over and over because we just can't find it within ourselves to step out into the unknown and do some experimenting and learning. So let's shift then to some of the generational characteristics of middle adulthood. And so I'm going to make a distinction here between the generational characteristics and the developmental characteristics because they're very different. When we talk about generational characteristics, we're talking about characteristics that are culturally conditioned. So we're aware these days, ever since the baby boomers in the post-World War II era, we're aware that people now grow up in cultures that are different from the culture that their parents grew up in. So every generation that comes along now has a very unique experience culturally, and that unique experience forms them in a way that is distinct from their parents and their grandparents and will be distinct from their children and their grandchildren. So that's what we mean when we're talking about generational characteristics. But when we're talking about developmental characteristics are consistent from generation to generation to generation. So that a baby boomer would have experienced certain developmental things when he or she was a teenager, and a Gen Xer or a millennial will experience those same kinds of developmental things when he or she is a teenager, such as the movement from being in a closed unit family to stepping out a little bit more into a wider world. Everybody experiences that as they move from childhood through adolescence into young adulthood. That's not a generational characteristic, that's a developmental characteristic. So when we think about the generational characteristics of middle adulthood, we are thinking primarily about Generation X. So this is essentially in our book on the seasons of adult faith formation, we basically just talked about people who were in their 40s and 50s. So we sort of set it out in decades rather than specific generational guidelines. And sociologists don't agree on exactly where the generations start and where they stop. So some will say Generation X is comprised of people who were born between the years of 1961 and 1979. Others will say, no, it was really more 1965 to 79 or even 1980. but that's the sort of the ballpark years for Generation X. So in the generation, first we have the events that were significant in forming this particular generation. So you're looking at things like the Challenger explosion, the Iran hostage crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the stagnation of the 70s and 80s, and the economic boom of the 90s, the rise of conservatism in U.S. politics and in the media, particularly in talk radio, and divorce and its impact on families and how that changed our understandings of families, and then the growth of media with personal computers, cable TV, and MTV. These are the things that were happening when Gen X was growing up and had a significant impact on their approach to life. Here are some of the characteristics of Generation X that kind of follow from experiencing those particular events that are in the list above. So Gen X individuals, and keep in mind, these are very general, and there are always exceptions to the rule. So we don't want to get too caught up in thinking that these are absolute truths in terms of people who are in their 40s and 50s. But Gen X, people in Generation X tend to be suspicious and skeptical, cynical of authority and institutions. And they get that primarily because they were the first generation to really experience divorce on a large scale. Now, we still do experience divorce on a pretty large scale, although divorce rates have been declining. But this is going to sound a little bit strange. We do divorce better today. We handle it better today than we did when the Gen X kids were growing up, because we were just new at it. It was something we hadn't experienced before. And so it wasn't, we didn't know the impact that it was going to have on children. And so the Gen X perspective is to be cynical of authority because their authority figures, their primary authority figures, their parents split and really didn't know how to manage that with their children. Gen Xers tend to be informal, casual, and direct. They are, as a whole, politically conservative because of the rise of conservatism as they were growing up, and it could be in part in reaction to their more liberal boomer parents. It's interesting, the millennials are swinging back liberal. It's so generations kind of have that very interesting swing. You have the builders who are more conservative, the boomers who are more liberal, the Xers who are more conservative, and now the millennials who are more liberal. So who knows what's going to happen next. And Gen X people tend to be a little more self-reliant, independent-minded. They've been called entrepreneurial and less committed to institutions. And this is, again, largely because when they came home from school, many of the Gen X kids came home to empty houses. It was, again, not just the first time we experienced divorce on a large scale, but also the first time that we experienced two parents working outside of the home. So a lot of Xers came home after school to an empty house and had to make things work on their own. They would let themselves in, they would do their homework, they would prepare dinner, they would clean up the house, and this just sort of nurtured in them this sort of self-reliant, independent-minded, I can get it done kind of mentality. And so a lot of Xers have also become very entrepreneurial. They're very much into starting their own businesses and getting out there and getting stuff done. And the work-life balance thing, this is something that shifts a lot also from generation to generation. With the boomers, you had more of a mentality of, you live to work, and you express yourself through your work. Whereas the Xers started to shift a little bit away from that and started to think more in terms of, yeah, but you know what? I don't want to be the person who sits on my deathbed wishing that I would have spent more time with family and friends. You know, so Xers were the ones that started saying more and more, you know, there aren't too many people who sit on their deathbed wishing they would have spent more time at the office, right? And that idea, that mentality really started to catch on with Gen X. Millennials are even taking that to a higher level in terms of work to live, not live to work. And they really, the whole work-life balance thing is critically important to the millennial generation. So parenting for Gen X. In the picture there, you see the helicopter, and Gen X have been labeled the helicopter parents, and oftentimes that's kind of a derogatory phrase that people use to describe Generation X parenting. But in some ways, it's really not surprising that they would parent in that style, given that their own parents were so absent as they were growing up. And so as partly a reaction against their own parents being so absent, they've kind of taken on a much more active role as parents. And so they practice this protective parenting. But it's also a very scientific parenting in terms of they really want to know what the experts are saying about effective parenting techniques and strategies. So Gen X became one of the first generations to really dig in and spend a lot of time reading and studying about what it means to be a great parent. And that oftentimes got expressed in some pretty protective parenting, but in other instances, it got expressed as some really outstanding parenting. So we want to take advantage of that in our ministry, and we'll say some things about that when we get to the practical stuff. So they do this ordered and structured parenting. They're the ones that kind of brought back the whole idea that, you know, kids do need a structured bedtime. We should be better about having more structured meal times. And so they really tried to create that kind of structure for their children. Focused on control. So when they volunteer for things, Gen X parents like to be given important roles. They like to, in some ways, volunteer to supervise. So they really want to be involved in their kids' lives and in their grandchildren's lives. And when they're volunteering, they're really volunteering for something meaningful. So Gen X faith, talk about that for a moment. Their faith, one of the first characteristics is that they really do want to experience faith sensually and in an experiential way. So what that means, and you know, the two pictures on this slide kind of show that, if your church is going to be a church that puts screens up so that the lyrics of songs can be on the screens, or other images that you put on the screens to enhance the worship experience, Gen X is going to be one of your biggest fans and one of your biggest supporters for making that kind of a thing happen. Builders won't be so excited about that. Some boomers are going to like the idea, and some won't. Millennials, they're not necessarily crazy about that. Sometimes we think that it's really the younger generation that wants the screens and wants the praise band. But as it turns out, Gen X seems to be the generation that is making the strongest push for that kind of worship experience, where there's a lot to see, a lot to smell, a lot to touch, a lot to hear. So they want a very sensual experience of worship. They also want their worship experience to be relevant. They want to be able to listen to a homily or go to an adult faith formation class, and they want to be able to take whatever it is that's being preached or taught, and they want to be able to apply it immediately. So for them, religion really, if it's not relevant to what they're doing in their daily life, it really is is in their mind second rate. So when they hear a homily, they want to be able to answer, how does this gospel passage impact the way I'm going to parent? How does this gospel passage impact the way I'm going to be a spouse, or the way I'm going to be a friend, or the way I'm going to interact with my aging parents, or the way I'm going to interact in the workplace, or even in my civic organizations that I belong to? They really want that level of specificity when they're trying to apply the experience of faith, of the gospel, and of other church doctrines in their own life. They want their religion to be authentic too. And by that, that means they really look for leaders who are transparent and honest. Now I'm going to use a word here, and I want you to pardon the harsh language, but I'm actually just quoting somebody, so this is not my phrase. But somebody once said that Generation X has a bullshit meter, and it's turned up to 11. And that's really a very accurate way to describe Gen X. Because remember, Gen X was they were being formed, so many of them, right in the post-Watergate period. That was their early childhood experience, being raised with that. And so they were hearing over and over from their parents how you just, you can't trust government. You can't trust large institutions. And so that mentality really seeped into them. And so they can sniff out inauthenticity more accurately than most generations. So they need the religion to be an authentic experience. People need to be real with them. They do have a strong quest to express their religious identity in community. And again, this could partially be making up for the lack of family that they experienced growing up, and so they really want to be connected in some communal way. And then a faith that makes cognitive sense to them and is also expressive embodied spiritual experience. So even though they want their faith to be relevant, and in other words, immediately applicable to whatever's going on in their messy lives, they still like a clean, clear expression of faith, something that's simple and easy to grasp cognitively. Now, I'm going to say something in a minute here that's going to contradict that because, of course, Gen X now is hitting middle adulthood. And in middle adulthood, that desire for certainty and that desire for clarity tends to disintegrate. So, so we'll hold on to that thought about making cognitive sense a bit here. All right, now let's move to the developmental characteristics. And now remember, developmental characteristics, these are going to be the characteristics of people who are in middle adulthood. So we're not talking about Gen X characteristics anymore. We're talking about typical middle adulthood characteristics. So these middle adulthood developmental characteristics are the same characteristics that were experienced by boomers and will be the same characteristics that are going to be experienced by millennials when they get to middle adulthood. So in younger adulthood, the question that people ask generally is, who am I? It's an identity question. But when you get to middle adulthood, the question shifts from who am I to who am I with you, right? So relationality becomes much more important in middle adulthood, whereas in younger adulthood, it's more about who am I kind of distinct from my family? Who am I going to be in the professional world? There is the relational question of marriage, but but still there's the grappling with, well, who am I going to be as a husband or as a wife or as a father or as a mother? It's all of that. And then in middle adulthood, that shifts more to what does it mean to be me as I'm deeply related to you? And so my identity is not seen inside of myself as much as it's seen wrapped up with you. In middle adulthood, there's a reassessment of the earlier commitments we made in life. So middle adults will question their careers significantly. Should I stay in this career? Should I go? Is there time for me to create a new career? There are questions of family life and extended family. How committed am I going to be to the commitments I made earlier to my siblings and my parents, to the values that they hold? In middle life, people often strike off in very new directions in terms of rediscovering their values and questioning the values that they were committed to from their family of origin. The question of marriage as a commitment rears its head in middle lifehood again in a big way. You've probably heard of the midlife crisis, and significant numbers of marriages do get challenged and often fail in middle adulthood because of that crisis. And so let's just say a thing about the crisis, because it is sort of a developmental experience. The crisis, and I'm borrowing from Adrian von Kamm, and I wrote about him in the article that upon which this webinar is based, and I believe Jared's going to give you tell you about that article a little bit later. But the midlife crisis is really a crisis that has kind of two possible directions. I can either continue building my life around accomplishment, or I can begin to reassess and start building the second half of my life around deeper relationship. And that's the struggle. Shall I define myself as a person who gets things done because I'm sort of at the peak of my functionality at this point in my life? Or am I going to follow the call to enter into deeper committed relationships? And when a healthy middle adult engages more deeply in relational attachment, those are the ones who tend to recommit to their marriages and really dig in and try to rediscover what that love is all about and make it even more meaningful for the second half of life. So the life goals piece, and this is what I was just talking about, is do I move from accomplishment to relationship? And again, that actually kind of summarizes nicely the experience of the midlife crisis. And then there's a search for deeper sense of community. So it's not just family relationships that are shifting, but how shall I engage in the civic community? How shall I engage politically? And how can I get more relational in the midst of all those engagements? And then there's the sandwich. Middle adulthood is classic for the sandwich experience. And the sandwich experience is simply that you have aging parents who are becoming more frail and are becoming needier. So you're experiencing that shift of relationship from I grew up with these people taking care of me, and now it seems like I'm being called to take care of them more. But at the same time, you have children and sometimes grandchildren that are making demands on your time. So one of the things that happens in middle adulthood is that people experience middle adulthood often as the absolute busiest, craziest time of their life. You have so many tugs on your time, from the generation before you with your parents to the generation or two behind you with your children and grandchildren. You are now excelling in your work probably more than you ever have. You've found your niche. If you're not being paid for your work, you've maybe found your niche in the volunteering experiences, and you're just deeply enmeshed in all of these relationships. And so calendaring can be a huge challenge in middle adulthood. And then in terms of faith development, James Fowler, the famous faith development specialist, puts middle adults in conjunctive faith. And what that means is that in conjunctive faith, as one moves through the stages of faith development in a healthy way, this is where the gray stuff of life becomes more meaningful than the black and white stuff of life. So when we were talking earlier about those clean presentations of doctrine that middle adults might appreciate, they also have a very new found love and appreciation for the reality that we live in mystery, that we do not have clean answers to all of the questions of life. And they begin to become aware that seeking out clean, crisp answers is actually a form of idolatry. So this is an important understanding for people who are working with middle adults in faith development. Seeking out clean answers. In fact, I once heard somebody say, wouldn't it be nice if we just had all the answers to life's questions? Wouldn't it be nice if God would just give us all those answers? And I remember, and I'm in middle life, and I remember one of the first thoughts that popped into my head was, yeah, but then we would be atheists, wouldn't we? Because isn't that the claim of scientific atheism, that all of the answers are there, and it's simply going to take us time to figure them out? Faith is different. Faith acknowledges that God is mystery, and we will never fully understand what that is and what that means. And so it's middle adulthood where that perspective really kind of opens up in a person's spirituality. And they become less concerned about knowing what's right and what's wrong, who's in, who's out, the black and the white, and much more open to, we just don't know. And they can sink into mystery in a very peaceful way. And then that journey gets carried out into later adulthood in some really wonderful ways. So there you have it. That's kind of a picture of middle adulthood in terms of the overarching theory of adulthood, which is that idea that healthy adulthood now, this is how we're defining it these days, healthy adulthood includes deep emotional attachment. Healthy adults are people who are in love. And then we explored those generational characteristics for the Gen X people, and then the developmental characteristics of the middle life experience. So let's talk for a bit here then about, I have 10 practical suggestions for you to think about in terms of how you approach ministry with middle adults. Now, some of these suggestions can certainly be applied to other stages of life, but some of them are very specific to middle adulthood. So this is always my first practical suggestion, pretty much no matter who I'm talking to in terms of ministry. Listen first. So often in church work, and I work with churches all over the place, and I see this all the time. We tend to assume that we can just come up with a program or a project or an initiative and it's going to work, and we haven't taken the time to really listen to the target audience, listen to the people for whom the project or program is being developed. And so we need to listen to middle adults if we want to serve them well. And it would behoove us to listen to them closely, because this actually, I don't know if you've been familiar with the research on the nuns, the people who have no religion anymore, and the duns, the people who are still searching for God, but they're done with organized religion. Well, the largest group of people who are leaving churches now are in middle adulthood. We often think it's the younger generation leaving, but that's really not the case. The younger generation simply didn't join, right, in large numbers. But it's the middle adults, and these are people who have been faithful for decades, people who have been on parish councils, many who were key volunteers in ongoing ministries, coming to church every Sunday, many even who were on staffs at churches. These are the folks who are now leaving in very large numbers, numbers that are in the tens of millions over the last several years. And they're in middle adulthood. So we really do have to approach them as listeners first, and then we'll have a kind of a clue of what we can do for them and with them that will really make a difference. And giving them something meaningful to do is a key part of it. There are some middle adults who are coming back to churches, not on Sunday, but they're coming back to be involved in a meaningful service experience, such as, working in a soup kitchen or some other kind of service ministry, or being involved in Habitat for Humanity through a local church. And they'll do that before they will come back to Sunday worship. So sometimes it's just they need to have some sort of meaningful experiential, remember they're tactile, this is the sensual generation. And they're entrepreneurial, so they want to do something, they want to experience something, and that can be the basis of a relationship that could bring them back into the worshiping community. Family ministry needs to be prioritized over peer ministry. Remember what we said about middle adults being excessively busy, right? And they and their children and grandchildren are being pulled in so many directions. And not too long ago, I was working with a church, and I was developing some ministry approaches with them. And so we did do a survey of the families, of the parents in that church. And their number one value, of all the values that they could have possibly mentioned, their number one was more family time. And these parents were predominantly middle adult parents. So the Gen X parents who felt robbed of family time when they were growing up are deeply hungry for family time now. So a church that's going to be successful with them is not going to separate them out as much for ministry as bring them together. So many very successful churches are shifting their peer ministries to family and intergenerational ministries. So faith formation is moving from just children in classrooms to whole families doing faith formation together. Teen service trips are shifting from just teenagers going out into the community or going on a week-long service trip to whole families doing that together now. And that's really valuable, because one thing we know about teen service is that teenagers who do service with their parents are far, far more likely to be lifelong servants than teenagers who do service with other teenagers. So peer ministry is not nearly as powerful in terms of creating lifelong faith as family and intergenerational ministry is. And you've got a generation of adults right now in your church, those middle adults, who are ready for this. And so it's a really important step to do. But again, it's got to be done with expertise. I've seen plenty of churches try to do intergenerational family ministry without the proper preparation and fall flat on their faces, and then they think it doesn't work, but it was just approached poorly. Okay, so in terms of relevance in preaching, unless you're a priest or a deacon, you're probably not preaching at your church, but the preaching, if preaching is going to be effective with middle adults, remember, it's got to be relevant. It's got to connect faith with daily life. And so I always recommend this, find that person who has influence over your priest or your deacon. That may not be you. And if that's not you, then you don't want to be the one making the recommendation to the priest about how the priest ought to be preaching his homilies. But there might be somebody in that church that could be that key person who could just help your pastor or your associate or your deacon to see the importance of making those connections. I met a priest when I was doing some work in Texas, and he had developed a team of people called his homily helpers. And they would meet with him on a weekly basis, and the team would rotate. It wasn't always the same people. And they would meet with him on a weekly basis to give him insight into the stuff that was really going on in the lives of families in his parish, and connecting that to what was going on in the culture, so that he could craft his homilies in a way that really made sense to people. So he was still preaching the same doctrine and the same exegetical stuff in the Gospels in terms of delivering the message, but he was coloring it all with real stories and real images that families could grasp and take home and put into practice right away. Then in terms of the, remember that bullshit meter we talked about? Promote what is real, not what is perfect. We don't make big promises that we can't keep, right? Whenever we talk to people about what's going to happen or what we're going to do, make it real. Be realistic. And then whatever we promise, make it happen. That's that whole authenticity piece that needs to be there to effectively capture the imagination of Generation X. They will read through an inauthentic piece immediately and trust will be broken. And when trust is broken, it's really hard to fix it. Not impossible, but really hard. No pedestals, right? Gen X does not want their parish leaders to be on pedestals, to think that they're perfect. They want to have human connection. And so that authenticity, again, needs to shine through in terms of the priests and the deacons and the lay leaders really connecting on a personal level with Gen X. Help these people slow down, right? One of the great ministries I think that a church can offer middle adults these days is a calendaring ministry. And a great strategy to help middle adults use their calendars more effectively is to teach them to start scheduling space, empty space on their calendars, so that as they're going through their week and building the events across a week or across a month, always asking the question, where's the empty space on this calendar? Where will I have time to breathe? Where will I have time for a little quiet? That's a really important thing. And if churches can pull that off and give middle adults and their families time to slow down, churches then become very relevant and very important in the lives of middle adults, because they do need help with that. And when they get it, they really appreciate it. Customizing spiritual formation. This means we're focused less on programming and more on accompaniment. So we create opportunities for people to connect with each other and to connect with leaders in more informal ways. We kind of have the saying now that ministry is no longer one size fits all, it's one size fits one. And through digital technologies, we are now able to customize spiritual journeys to individuals rather than to blanket the entire group of people with one spiritual approach. We need to eliminate judgmental mindsets. Remember I mentioned earlier those tens of millions of people who are now walking away from churches? The number one reason they walk away is they experience judgmental mindsets in the churches that they attend. And they experience it not just from clergy, not just from lay leaders, but they experience it in the pews as well. And so, of course, we all the time have to work on becoming less judgmental. But if we can make that a top priority for churches, a top initiative for the coming year, we are going to identify what judgmentalism looks like, and we are going to systematically eliminate it from this church. If you do that, middle adults, Gen X is going to be much more likely to join you. Decrease mandates and increase invites. Telling people they have to do this or they must do that is a sure way to turn them off. And that's just part of the 21st century mentality. Mandates just don't work the way they used to. And they used to work very well. When the culture was set up for it, they worked great. But the culture has shifted. And so the more we mandate, the less we connect these days. So I have experimented with this. I helped a church develop a confirmation program where they did not mandate anything. They simply offered and invited. And then, of course, they made their offerings spectacular. And they discovered that there was absolutely no drop in participation. In fact, that one of the things that they invited was parent participation, which they hadn't done before. And every family had adult participation in this program. No mandates, just invitation. And then finally, we need to move from the church as a club to the church as a movement. That's really what churches are. They are not clubs. The church is not a country club where you spend some money and get your services. It's a movement, and we're all in the movement together, and our goal is to love God, love our neighbor, and through that love, change people's lives. That's what it's a movement. That's the core of the movement. It's simple, and the more we drive that movement mentality, the more middle adults will get excited because they are entrepreneurial, they want to make a difference, and they want to get involved and do something. And the millennials are the same way, so you're going to be helping them too by doing this. And so are the boomers, by the way. All right, so let me stop there. That was a lot of stuff. And I'll pass it back to Jared and see what his plan is here for fielding some questions.
Thank you. Just pulling up the screen here. Just to remind everybody where they can ask questions. And you can see some of them already coming in now, which is wonderful. So go ahead and type those questions out, and we will get to as many of those as we can the next 10 minutes or so. We'll have a little conversation about what you talked about, Jim. Thank you so much for presenting. I'll kick it off just with the question I had, and as we kind of read through the ones that are coming in. And you kind of mentioned briefly the importance of intergenerational ministry, how this is something that, especially for this current generation, that's craving that family time, having some family family faith formation kind of things, and that seems to be where a lot of parishes are experimenting, where a lot of parishes want to go, moving away from that traditional religious education model. And you mentioned kind of briefly that people are trying it, but then they're failing or think they're failing, and they're just not doing it correctly. Any quick tips on the best ways to do that, to do intergenerational family faith formation, and make sure that's an effective experience for the families?
Yeah. It's first of all, it needs to be a team approach. The leadership of the parish does need to be on board with it, and see the value of it. And the team needs time to have some formation. So doing this approach is not, you're not going to buy a program and implement it. This is a program that the parish really does need to create from the ground up. Because when we're talking about intergenerational, we're talking about a core identity of the church. The church is intergenerational. It is. It's one of the very few places in our culture where all of the generations gather on a regular basis for a meaningful experience, and that's worship, right? You have 5 generations in worship every Sunday. We've never experienced that before, right? I mean, we've always had people of different ages, but this is the first time where we've got 5 culturally distinct generations. And so in order for us to effectively be church, we've got to learn what that means, and understand the benefits of creating friendships across the generations. So step number 1 is form a team. Step number 2, learn about what the whole intergenerational world is about and what are the benefits of moving in that direction. And then step number 3 is listen to your parishioners and come up with some really great open questions about intergenerational processes, and just ask those questions across the parish and get some feedback. And from there, you'll get some ideas about what some strategic opportunities are when you start reading the responses to these great questions. I do guide churches through these processes, so I'm available to do that kind of work, and you can contact me if you want to know more.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, question for you. What would you say would be the best way to reach or stay connected with these middle adults? Do you see them leaning more towards email? What are some good ways do you see social media? Do you see, just strictly bulletins? How are you able to fully stay connected with them or get them involved?
Yeah, really vibrant churches have a very well thought out communication plan, and because you're dealing with 5 generations, you really do need to have a comprehensive communication plan that includes paper and digital and face-to-face communications. So I would say all of the above. Okay, there's a new tool out there. Well, it's not brand new, but it's called Flocknote, and you can try it for free. You can add 40 people to it for free, and if you go beyond 40, then you have to start paying for it. But the nice thing about this is that the free version has all the bells and whistles as the paid version does. So when you're experimenting with it, you're experimenting with the real deal. And the reason I mention it is because it allows you to do mass emails, mass newsletters, and mass texting. It's really the only application I know that can do all 3 of those things. So it gives you, and then of course you can print the things out too, so you get that 4th paper way of communicating. It's just one tool that gives you multiple ways to communicate, and it's very simple. So my answer would be, yeah, use as many communication methods as you can, and try to be patient with folks when they don't respond well, because they're not going to, right? People are just not as good at responding to communications as they were before because they're just so overwhelmed.
Great answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Jim, the question just came in about being a midlife single adult. Saying, I know quite a few people in my group, but what would you suggest as ways to reach, engage, and minister to those of us without spouses or without children?
Yeah, sure. So the single adult experience in middle life developmentally is very similar to the married adult experience in terms of the need to connect relationally and to not get caught up in the accomplishment mentality for the second half of life. And so single middle adults, when I do coaching, right, life coaching, executive coaching, so forth, when I'm working with singles, some of the issues that come up that are most important to them are workplace relationship issues. Okay, so how do I relate to my boss? How do I relate to my employees? How can I take my business and my work and transform it from just something I do to an expression of who I am in my relationships with the people that I touch through my work? So similar to any middle adult, it's shifting from accomplishment to maximizing relationship experience. So just one way to try to think about that, and singles need that in a very particular way because they have to be more deliberate about building structured time for relationships than married people, because married people have it built right in every day, right? But if you're living alone, you have to be more deliberate about planning that emotional attachment time that's so necessary for adulthood.
Great. Let's see, we had some questions about the group name that you mentioned about, that help the priest understand his parish better. Was it the homily helpers? Was that what it was?
Homily helpers. It's not an organized thing. It's just something that this priest made up. But it's something. It's funny. I had been thinking about it for years, and then when I went to Texas and I met this priest and he was doing it, I was like, oh, thank God somebody's doing it. And he said it has transformed his homilies, and his parishioners are just thanking him profusely for the great homilies that he's delivering, because he's telling real stories. He's telling their stories. He's preaching like Jesus preached, right? He's using the stories of the people who are listening. And yeah, homily helpers is what he called it.
Like, we're getting close to 4 o'clock here, and Jim, I think that's a good reiteration of a theme that you constantly hit upon, which is to listen first, which you said is something you always suggest, listening first, whether it's homilies, whether it's, adult faith formation, whether it's intergenerational ministries, whatever it might be. We've got a lot of questions, Jim, that came in we didn't get to today. Can you remind us where can people find you, reach out to you, talk to you, or maybe ask questions?
Sure. I don't know if you can see it on the screen right now, but my website is coachingtoconnect.com. It's Coaching to Connect, all runs together, and it's the word T-O, Coaching to Connect. So you can go there, and contact information is there. I have an online calendar where you can actually make appointments with me if you want to have a free consultation with the possibility of getting into a coaching relationship with me. And then my email is jim@coachingtoconnect.com.
We'll make sure we put the link to your website in the recording page, so you can look for that as well. Whether you're watching this live or as a recording, you can find that link there. Christine?
And before we sign off, we would like to thank our partners once again, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priest Councils. If you're not familiar with their organizations, please check out their websites, which you can see displayed on the screen here. This webinar, as well as all of our past webinar recordings, appear on YouTube, Vimeo, and the Ave Maria Press website at www.avemariapress.com/webinar-videos.
And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the Adult Faith Formation Committee from the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership. This is the third in a series, kind of a year-long series of webinars about adult faith formation, about all the different generations. This is the third, the midlife adults, and then the next one, which will be in January, will be about mature adults, so we're talking about 60s and 70s there, and then we'll have a date soon in March for the older adults, 75 and older. So as Jim mentioned earlier, he has written an article that you can find on the NCCL website, which we'll make sure and link up again for you to read with additional info. It's got some really good resources, I think statistics and things like that about this generation and how to serve them, which I think are very valuable, as well as the things that Jim talked about today. So feel free to read that article, and then the other articles that would accompany the forthcoming webinars. And you can also find, of course, the recordings of the past webinar in this kind of mini-series within a series on our website as well. I want to extend a quick invitation to the next webinar next Tuesday, November 14th. Hofsman Ospino will share a webinar in his new book, El Credo, and this is their second webinar that is actually fully in Spanish. So it is in, if you're an English-speaking person, you might want to share this with some of the Hispanic ministry folks in your parishes and your diocese. This will be something that they can benefit from themselves, but also share with their other people that are working in ministry with Spanish-speaking folks. So check that out. Feel free to sign up on the Ave Maria Press website. We'd love to have you join us again next week. So thanks, everybody. Thanks again, Jim, for your time today, and we're looking forward to learning more about your work with Coaching to Connect. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. God bless everybody. Have a great week.